The year was 1972 when my mom's life would dramatically change forever. My mom grew up in a wealthy family in China. She was born in 1965 with the name Ching Shuk-young in Hong Kong, at the time a British territory. When Hong Kong was still under British rule, it was seen as a place to escape to from the communist government. When it was owned by Great Britain, in the newspaper article, "Opportunity spurs Chinese to venture swim to Hong Kong," it even states, "The illegal immigrants know that if they can get past the border guards, Hong Kong law allows them to stay." This was all before the communist government moved in. She lived in a luxurious 5-bedroom penthouse apartment. At the same time, the Vietnam War was taking place. It took place from 1965 to 1973, where the U.S. forces fought against the communist-ruled Vietnam. About 500,000 American soldiers were in Vietnam by 1968. Much of the ground fighting was taking place in jungles, causing battles to be brutal. Since the territory was hard battle terrain, much of the combat was fought with bombs. Brooklyn, New York, 1972, the year my mom immigrated to America in order to escape the communist government. My mom exited the plane with only the clothes she wore and the family that she loved. As an immigrant going to America with hardly anything, it was hard enough. But my mom was an Asian immigrant during the Vietnam War. Ask yourself, who exactly was affected by the war? For my mom, she was affected many ways. One was with the first word that my mom heard stepping off the plane into American soil, which was an Asian racial slang. The bullying didn't stop within the first years of arriving. At 7 years old, my mom recalls rocks, stones, and eggs being thrown at her every day for the next 8 years. My mom now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 people in Brooklyn. One brother, Kenny, another brother, Ming, and her parents. To pay the bills, her parents needed to find a new skill or a new job. Her mom worked in a textile sweatshop in Chinatown, and her dad was a dishwasher in a Chinese restaurant. Her parents made about $10 combined every day throughout the 70s. In October of 1972, the same year her family came across, her youngest brother Chu was born. Since there was no health insurance, in order to deliver the baby, her parents took out loans to pay the hospital. Eventually the bills got harder to pay, and her mom noticed my mom's talent for sewing. At age 15, the summer of 8th grade, my mom joined her mother and worked in the same textile sweatshop in Chinatown. She worked 6 to 7 days every week, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. on weekdays, and 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. During this time period, child labor was becoming increasingly popular due to the growing industrial market. Many children, most younger than my mom, worked the same hours as her. This is described by Clark Martinelli, one of the most shameful events in our history. Similarly seen, the debate of child workers goes back to the earliest industrialization there was in Great Britain, around the 1830s. According to the newspaper article, Workers at 12, there has been similar events in Moscow, Russia. In the article, Child Labor and Factory Acts, it discussed how even in the 1830s, new taxing laws were being made against child labor, and that the number of children working in factories went from 56,000 to 33,000 in just 3 years. While working and staying in school, my mom still managed to keep up her good grades, but it wasn't like that before. When my mom first came over, she was held back a year and put into the slow learnings class since she couldn't read, write, or speak English. Being an Asian immigrant with hate for Vietnamese people at the time, almost no one tried to help her learn the language. My mom learned by herself from listening to the radio, watching TV, and a little help from a lady at the nearby public library. Finally, in 6th grade, she was able to write and read at a beginning level, but she was still in the last ranked class. But by 8th grade, she was in the honors college reading class. She applied to the top high schools in New York City and was accepted to the number 1 and number 3 high school. She decided to go to the number 3, called Brooklyn Tech, because it was closer to home. This relates to the quote, The kids are undereducated and outcasts in schools where they enroll for a few weeks before moving in. Like the newspaper, migrant workers still in bondage, my mom was an outcast due to the bullying and was undereducated in the terms of the society at the time in 6th grade due to her illiteracy. Even with these setbacks, my mom managed to overcome them with hard work and perseverance. Later in life, my mom will work at the textile factory even into the summers of college until she graduated with a diploma at Buff State. She met my dad after college in 1990, and they were married by 1994. In the next 5 years, they'll have 3 children, the oldest Judith, the middle Lily, and the youngest Megan. To this day, there are stereotypes about Asian immigrants being communist, but my mom is proof against it. Even her grandfather worked on the American railways in the 1800s in order to escape the communist government. This just goes to show how her family background is very pro-democratic, not to mention that even her grandfather moved to Hong Kong on purpose once it became British territory in order to escape the communist government after he moved back to China. Despite this, she was made fun of daily for years just for being an Asian immigrant during the Vietnam War. My mom's family isn't the only example of non-communist Chinese immigrants. In the newspaper marked Rise in Immigrants, there wasn't just an increase of Chinese immigrants in the US, but also in Ceylon, India, due to the growing communist government. Just another fact showing that the Chinese immigrants shouldn't be looked at as communists, especially when most of them are trying to escape the communist government. When talking about war, not just the Vietnam War, people seem to think that only the soldiers and leaders in battle are affected, but that isn't true. Even people like my mom, who travel hundreds of miles to America, are affected by the war. My mom was affected through the bullying, discrimination, and unfair treatment due to her ethnic background while the Vietnam War took place. When you think about people that you see through day-to-day life, you may not realize how the current military situations and events change the way that they are looked at through society. In the newspaper, A Sad Moment in World History, it states, "Is the sad moment in world history to give way to the pressures of the appeasers and disregards of moral principles in international relations." This proves the idea that politics and military actions both change the society's morale and principles. Similarly seen in the journal Vietnam as Vital, Myth or Reality, through pages 12 through 15, it talks about how the American society has an effect on the political point of view of military leaders. That also has an effect on the American society with a never-ending cycle. In another journal, Vietnam, Historical Background, it discusses how the history of an ethnic group follows them as a type of identity, but this does not mean that they should be hated for this identity. Lastly, on page 208, in a book by Kathy Friedman Casaba, it states, "There is little opportunity or need for individual initiative." This is just another example of how immigrants from different ethnic backgrounds are not given equal opportunity, but they themselves, like my mom, need to take their own initiative. Every day, people that you don't even think about are affected daily by different things and different means related to military actions.